Minister, if I can just begin with you. So, I mean, you're the Minister for Industry in a country that has quite a fast-growing industrial sector. What are the main factors that are leading to Pakistan's growth at the moment, and what are the biggest challenges for you over the next 5 years?
Well, in Pakistan, three sectors have really grown a lot. One is auto sector, and the other one is the fertilizer, and third one is chemical. Last year, the auto sector had a growth of about 23%, and fertilizer sector had a growth of 16%, and chemical had a growth of about 10%. Overall, growth in manufacturing has been about 6.8 from previous year's 4.8%. So I think we are in the right direction, and government is working on the CPEC projects. And once the CPEC projects come up, that there would be hopefully more manufacturing in Pakistan, a lot of foreign investment in Pakistan. CPEC is going to make infrastructure like roads from one end to the other end all over Pakistan. And then we will have 9 economic special zones also with the CPEC. That would be all over Pakistan.
What is, just for the audience, what is CPEC?
CPEC is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So basically, you can call it Make in Pakistan. So government is going to provide with the infrastructure, electricity, power, and gas for the manufacturers to come and invest in Pakistan. And we are hoping there would be a lot of investment. There might be a lot of allocation of the industry from China also, because Chinese labor is becoming expensive. So we hope that in these 9 economic zones, there would be relocation of Chinese industry as well. But it's not only for China. Any country, any investor from all over the world can come and invest in Pakistan. We have announced in economic zones the policy where if you bring your plant and machinery, it will be first time duty free, and there would be no tax or income tax for 10 years. So a lot of Italian firms, a lot of Belarus firms are also interested, and we have in auto sector 3 key players who are working. We have announced a new automobile policy also, in which we have given more incentives to automakers to come and make cars in Pakistan. And we have come up with a new motorcycle policy also. So we are hoping with the CPEC thing, CPEC altogether will have about investment of over 52 billion in infrastructure and economic zones and power shortage we have. So since the government of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif came in, he wanted to control the power shortage and meet the power shortage by end of his tenure. So we as a government are very hopeful that inshallah by next year we will overcome the power shortage which we are facing, and which has kept the industry at slow pace, because you need power and gas for industry to run. So government has signed a long-term, we have shortage of gas also in Pakistan, so government has signed long-term agreement with Qatar for LNG, and we are making a pipeline to connect with India, which a lot of work has been done. So I'm sure once these things are done, there would be no power shortage and no gas shortage in Pakistan. And as I said, it will be tax holiday, and it will be duty-free machinery one time in Pakistan. So we are looking forward from manufacturers from all over the world to come and set up industries in Pakistan.
I mean, the power shortage has been a huge barrier to development in Pakistan, hasn't it? It's been something that, I mean, industry for, decades has been talking about. Do you think it's realistic for it to be fixed?
I personally think the last government really ignored it. The power shortage, as you said, was there for a long time.
Yeah.
And they did not do anything substantial for the power shortage. But Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif realized that right from the beginning when he came into power. And all his concentration is towards the power shortage in Pakistan. So when we came into power, there were about 10,000 megawatt shortfall in Pakistan, and I think by end of this year we will be installing about 6,000 megawatts, and by end of tenure of the government, we shall be in surplus in power. That's the aim and object of the government right now.
Okay. And what about regional connectivity? How well connected is Pakistan's infrastructure, both electricity and otherwise, to its neighbours?
Well, right now we have our infrastructure connecting all the major ports and major cities, but then, as I said, CPEC is mostly concentrating mostly on power shortage and motorways. And there would be a lot of motorways coming up, connecting Gwadar, Karachi, which is the port, and new port is coming up in the Gwadar, which is very close to Gulf states, and I think especially from Muscat, it takes about 12 hours by launch to go to Gwadar. So that's the reason Chinese are developing Gwadar port, and Chinese are expecting that once Gwadar port becomes operational, they will be exporting to Europe and America from Gwadar, because the transport from Gwadar would be half time-wise and money-wise. So that's the reason they want to operate Gwadar port as soon as possible.
Okay. So as if I understand directly, and just for the audience's benefit, so that the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the idea behind that is to build infrastructure from the China-Pakistan border down directly to the Indian Ocean, to give China a route to a direct route into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons, but Pakistan is going to benefit also. As I said, there could be a lot of relocation of industry from China into Pakistan, and a lot of movement, economic movement, motorways are being made, and industrial economic zones are being made, and whatever they export, Pakistan will get share out of that from exporting from Pakistan.
And how is that infrastructure being funded? Is it domestically funded? Is it loans, foreign loans? Is it foreign aid?
No, it's all under the Chinese assistance. And China is mainly making all this infrastructure things and power things also. Power and infrastructure all is being made with the investment of 52 billion of China into Pakistan.
And is that loan-based assistance or grant-based assistance?
I'm sorry?
Is it a loan or is it a grant from China?
Well, I think it's a soft loan sort of thing, or pay as you earn. Some are BOT also, or some are soft loans also, and the government of Pakistan will have to pay back, or the project will have to pay back to CPEC over the period of certain time.
Okay. And that's quite a big risk for Pakistan, right? I mean, it was not that long ago that, Pakistan received an IMF package, and now you're sort of increasing your stock of foreign debt. Do you think that's a big risk?
Well, it's just the companies, basically, the Chinese companies who are borrowing from the Chinese banks and investing in Pakistan. So it's not a direct debt on Pakistan.
Okay.
And they will make the infrastructure, they will earn and pay back to the Chinese banks, basically.
Okay, all right. Well, we can come back to Pakistan more in the discussion. I'd like to move on to your neighbour, your very big neighbour, India, and Shafi, if I can bring you in on this one. You're working for an Indian company here in the GCC, but from a manufacturing perspective, of course, the government of Narendra Modi in India has a very strong manufacturing policy. So the big Make in India campaign, we've probably all seen that being advertised in the media or elsewhere. Yet it hasn't been that successful to date. So India's industrial production has not grown that much, despite the campaign and despite the apparent policy support. What's your perspective on the outlook for Indian industry?
So one has to go back to the start of the economic reforms in '91 to understand the context of where India is today and where India is moving to in the future. So from a so-called Hindu rate of growth of under 4%, in '91, when we were forced to open up our economy due to serious factors, we started moving in a direction of attracting foreign direct investment, opening up the manufacturing sector, liberalizing various regulations. Now, if you see the trend, while political governments have changed almost 5-6 times over this period, the direction of policy has remained more or less the same. I mean, while there can be evening TV debate on how policy is different from one party to the other, reality remains that more or less the direction has remained the same. Of course, our Prime Minister, I guess the world has acknowledged today that he beats the Chief Marketing Officer of any Fortune 500 company, and most definitely the marketing efforts of most countries around the world. So to that extent, we have managed to communicate to the world much more strongly after Prime Minister Modi has taken over that we are open to business, and more importantly, we are open to manufacturing and India becoming a manufacturing base. But one thing is very clear, as Mike and I were just discussing in the speaker's room, is that we are not and we will not, in my opinion, and I guess Mike concurs, that will not be a absolute low-cost manufacturing destination. So it'll have to be a middle and high-value manufacturing sector. To that extent, we are moving in the right direction. If you see FDI growth from 2015, 16 to 16, 17, previous year, has almost been 20% growth. Not necessarily only in manufacturing, of course, we recognize that a substantial part of that goes to services sector. But it has crossed $50 billion. FDI has crossed the threshold of $50 billion last year.
Yeah. Could I just challenge you on that? On that point a bit. So, of course, every country would like to be a high-value manufacturer, right? So it's sort of in every country's plan or design. I know you don't represent the government, but is it really realistic for India? I mean, comparatively, it's got quite a small manufacturing base. It does have a lot of cheap labor, and when you think about who else is in the mid to high manufacturing value chains, you've got countries like China itself. You've got places like Malaysia, like Mexico, that are very big powers, have existing excellent infrastructure, really well connected, already have a highly skilled workforce. Is it realistic for India to think it can displace a country like Malaysia out of the manufacturing value chain?
So just to make a point, not only do I not represent the government, I actually am part of the opposition side of but having said that, I truly believe that the policy direction is in the right direction. And it is not about being able to replace. I think if you see, nobody expected India to build up its automotive manufacturing capacity to what it is today. We are expected to be in the top 5 manufacturer of automobiles in the next few years. So there is definitely, the policy impetus have helped attract, and please understand, India did not provide out of the way incentives to attract any of these automobile companies. They came, the domestic market provides a big enough incentive for manufacturing companies to come in. Unlike Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, except of course China, they have to manufacture and capture a export market. Whereas in India, any company can come in. And why is Apple now talking to us? Apple can open maybe 10 other contract manufacturing plants in China. But why are they talking to government of India today to start manufacturing their phones in India? obviously, it is a mix of the high quality talent. When I say high quality talent, you have to understand that it's not a billion people of high quality talent. But even if 10 million people are talented in a billion people, that is a workforce which is much bigger than what Malaysia can provide or Thailand can provide. So to that extent, we have in us, one, a domestic market which is attractive enough. Second, a high talent pool which is big enough when compared to other manufacturing bases, of course, except China.
Okay. All right. Well, let's we'll come back to India, of course, again. But now I'd just like to move on to Mike Singh from Telecom Carib. So, I mean, you're based in Latin America. So, why do we have you on our South Asia panel? What's your perspective on South Asian manufacturing?
Thank you. First of all, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuhu. I extend peace and blessings of the people of Latin America to my distinguished host, the government and people of the UAE. And I always remember Baba Zayed in my du'as and my prayers for forging such a cohesive society. My name illustrates my Indian roots. Mike Singh. I'm in Latin America by virtue of history, not by choice. My ancestors were Indian freedom fighters that were sent out of India in chains for rebelling against British rule in 1857 to British Guyana, which was the very first place Indians migrated to anywhere in the world. In 1920, my grandfather returned back to India to join the Indian National Army. So in my family, we always remembered from whence we came, and we must never forget our roots and our commitment. And I was saying to Minister, I personally really don't recognize the borders of India and Pakistan because I've got my roots in a place called Multan in Pakistan. And like many in the diaspora, we want them all to come together. But you have 5 million Indians living in Latin America. In 2000, Prime Minister Modi visited Guyana. And he said, you know, you're more important to us now than ever before. Never mind the fact that Prime Minister Nehru once said, you're Indians that are far gone, you're away, you're not really part of the family. We took that as an insult. But since this Prime Minister has come into office, they have made great strides in reaching out to the diaspora. India wants to become a member of the UN Security Council. The 5 million persons of Indian descent living in Latin America could conceivably deliver 30 solid votes for India for her to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Latin America, outside of India, represents the single largest bloc of young people in the world. The pendulum has swung from north to south and has swung from west to east. India has democracy, has demography, and it has demand, and he's talked to you about manufacturing. I talk here about connectivity and human capital. The mere fact that you've got an Indian heading Google, an Indian heading Microsoft, an Indian heading Pepsi, and an Indian also heading Deloitte is just an example of the great breeding ground India is for intellectual capital. You are going to see Silicon Valley is not going to survive for very long because the brains that we've had in the West are going back now into India. India is experiencing a brain gain. An example of the brands, Jaguar Land Rover is today owned by Tata. Who would have believed the empire would have struck back? The former colony rescued 2 iconic British brands from obscurity and perhaps financial collapse. That is an example of what we talk about India. Companies like Royal Enfield, which were great British brands, are today owned by Indian companies and they're expanding through Latin America. I work in the telecom sector. India has the highest rate of mobile phone adoption now in the world. I talked about Apple. Foxconn is going into India to do their assembly because the intellectual capital that India has, no country in the world today. It is unfathomable that the IITs and IIMs of India and many other institutions are producing millions of people. You take, let me give you an example, the United States. You take the Indian component out of the US public health sector or the US healthcare sector, and you will have a crisis. It will collapse. There's no hospital in the United States or no town or city you go to and you would not run into an Indian healthcare professional. You look at all the top brains and talent in the top Fortune 500 companies. You're going to see Indians in the leadership. This is just...
So if I can give you a follow-up on the human capital point. So, I mean, you're right, India, well, in fact, also South Asia as a whole, has a large population. Pakistan also one of the world's most populous countries. They have quite young populations. Levels of education are good at the very top level, although I would say I think primary and secondary schooling still has a long way to go, is much lower quality than the very high end. Yet, at the same time, South Asia has some of the worst levels of female participation in the labor force. So it's well to say there's lots of people, but actually half of them find it very difficult to participate effectively in business, actually all across South Asia. And that's one big reason why the region has lagged behind East Asia in terms of its growth. Do you think that countries in South Asia are doing enough to get women into the workforce?
I think, with the passage of time, education, I always say, is the key arbiter in the fight against ignorance and poverty. In India, we have, and I think you find this more in the rural north. In the south of India, we have a lot of Indian, women blazing new trails. I'll just name Kiran Mazumdar, who is very well known in the...
So I'm sure there are individuals, but if we look at the economy as a whole...
But I think in many rural areas, in India, and I'm sure in Pakistan, you have women who have access to education, and I like to name Malala Yousafzai as a great example of a person that stood up against the forces of tyranny and terror and radical thinking. Malala is a great example of
had to leave the country as a result.
But she's still championing rights of young people across the world, whether we accept it or not. The fact is, she's a product of Pakistan, and rightfully so.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make one point in this. Fully respect your comment that, yes, there is gender disparity, but 2 points which has held right across South Asia, not just in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, is the political empowerment of women leaders. All these countries have had women prime ministers, one. Second, in India, there are several women chief ministers. Last point, in my home state, Kerala, and this comes to a point where, the transition is happening. My home state, Kerala, is one of the best educated in the country, with close to 100% literacy. Now what's happening is in medical schools and engineering schools in Kerala, there are more women students than boys. You see the transition that's happening. And that's across from communities, not just from a particular community or a religion. Across, and including those religions or communities which we consider as being conservative, that transition is happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me just ask the audience if, before I continue on with my list of questions, if anyone would like to raise their hand and ask something to one of our panelists about South Asia or manufacturing there. So nothing as yet, so I'll give you another chance if you want to pluck up your courage to join the discussion. Could I perhaps raise the topic of regional integration within South Asia, which is relatively low, and there's not a whole lot of supply chain integration between the different economies of South Asia. How much is that a barrier to future growth? Minister, if we could start with you.
Yeah, it is, of course, an impediment which the government are trying to overcome. As I said, CPEC will open up a lot of route from Malaysia. Even if Malaysia they can be connected through CPEC by China, and China to the rest of the world. And India also, of course, if they want, can be connected with this. And as we are sitting in Godha, at the hub of the Gulf states, so Gulf states also can be connected from Godha. Saudi Arabia can be connected, Africa can be connected, Yemen can be connected, Central Asian countries can be connected from this. So this is what the government of Pakistan is working basically to connect the region also, not just China, but connect it up to Malaysia and then connect it to the Gulf regions and then connect it to Saudi Arabia and the African countries also. And Central Asian countries as well.
Okay. Shafeshi, can I come to you with a different question? You want to come back on that as well?
I want to comment on that. While that is the aspiration, the reality is that unless India and Pakistan gets their diplomatic and commercial relations right, no regional cooperation, no regional economic integration will become a reality. So that is something that Indian policymakers, Indian leadership and Pakistani leadership has to recognize and take steps to resolve.
Well, I think the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif knows about that, and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif wanted free trade with India. I don't know what's the thinking on the other side, and I hope if we have no problem at the borders, Prime Minister has always wanted a free trade in India and Pakistan, right from the beginning. So you're right, this needs to be solved, and as I said, I mentioned India as well. It should be part of this to boost the economy and make it more viable connectivity.
So we've heard quite, I guess from the panel, quite an optimistic picture about doing business in South Asia. I mean, I was wondering, Shafi, your perspective as someone who sort of, does a lot of business in South Asia, what are your top 3 complaints about the region as a businessman?
So I think at the national, both at the national level, the Prime Minister is definitely setting the agenda. Not only for manufacturing, but to make ease of doing business much better. His stated goal is that India has to be in the top 50 countries in ease of business rankings as quickly as possible. Though we have only moved, we have moved ahead. We moved 4 places, but that's not enough. We're still in the 130, late 128 range. While the policy setting at the highest level in the federal national government, central government is is very, very positive, and there is fairly intense competition among the states, which is starting to play out well for businesses in terms of incentives, in terms of how they set state-level policies to attract business. These 2 are the good points. The main complaints and the main fear that I have is that Prime Minister Modi's administration, in their in my assessment, in their positive thinking or positive objective of eradicating corruption, they have started empowering Indian bureaucracy, middle bureaucracy and junior bureaucracy with wide discretionary powers. So an income tax assessment officer today has more powers than what he or she had pre-91. Now, that works well if the officer and the bureaucracy is clean and honest. But when they are not, it's recipe for disaster. So unless sufficient checks and balances are put in place against misuse of these wide powers being granted to the bureaucracy, it can actually backfire and create huge negative effect and negative sentiment among the business. So that's one part. The second part is not directly on the business segment, the demonetization, for which which was complained about by the opposition, but
complained about by me too.
Modi has got
lots of
tremendous support in voting.
Yeah.
That, in my assessment and most economists' assessment, including your magazine, has said that it has pulled back the growth, which need not have happened. And the last point, and this is nothing to do with economics, unless Modi and his government and his party set the socio-political environment right over the next 3 years, there could be a possibility that their social issues could rise up, which could play out a negative effect on Indian economy. So these are the three things that I fear for the Indian economy.
Yeah. Okay. Let's pick up on the sort of more social angle. I did want to ask a question about sustainability and the environment. So, South Asia already now has some of the world's most polluted cities. So air pollution is very bad, as is pollution of waterways. There's a big problem of water scarcity, particularly in the North India and Pakistan. Worries with climate change, sort of changing the amount of meltwater coming off the Himalayas, which sustains all the kind of big rivers that are the mainstay of economies across South Asia. Are governments in the region prioritizing environmental sustainability enough, or are they just storing up future problems? Minister, if we start with you.
Well, I think it's a very important issue you have raised now, and all the governments should give attention to this, because in future we see water problems because of glaciers are melting. And sometimes there's a flood, a lot of glaciers melt and there's a flood also. But then forestation also needs to be replanted, and that's a big connection in between the environment change. And forests in countries like Pakistan are disappearing also. Unfortunately, it's a provincial subject, it's not a federal subject. So we are in coordination with different provinces, and the provinces, each province almost has a different party's government also in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue we have. But then government is concentrating to make dams, big and small dams also, to solve this problem. The water is melted and it goes into sea, but certain amount of water has to go to sea to keep the sea at distance, otherwise they are taking the fertile lands also, especially in the province of Sindh. So I think if government is working on 2-3 projects, the dams and the northern areas near the Gilgit towards the Chinese border. Mm-hmm. Basha Dam, the work has already started. There are 2 more sites there, and the provincial government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was the former northwestern province, has been renamed as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They are trying to make small dams as well. And because a lot of forestation is towards the north, towards the Chinese border and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, I think they are concentrating on these issues also to make the environment clean. We have this problem in the rivers also. We have 5 rivers in Pakistan, and the largest river being the Indus River, which comes from Himalaya, and then Kashmir, then Punjab and goes to Pakistan, to Sindh and Arabian Sea, is also polluted, and the provincial governments are working on this, and federal government is giving them all the assistance on this.
Okay. Let me just come back to the audience again, give you a second chance if anybody has any questions they'd like to raise with our panel. I can see a hand up at the back.
Hi there. My question is to all the three panelists. I mean, today in this world where supply chains are very global in nature, the power of a country does not comes from how big army or navy or armed forces they have. It comes from the economic power they have. And if that's the case, I mean, a lot has been discussed and heard on this panel as well as on TV, media, and so on, wherein we talk about government should do X, Y, and Z, or the reciprocating government is not taking the right actions and so on. I would like to ask the panelists, as industry or as private sector, what can they do in order to bring together and enforce governments to start rethinking about working together? Mm-hmm. What can they do in order to open up the borders further so that there is a more sensible economic cooperation, which helps to the development of people living in these countries rather than just investments on arm and ammunition and so on?
Okay, so we've spoken about maybe what governments should be doing. Yeah, let's flip that around. What should the private sector be doing? Shafi, do you want to start us off?
So, the reality is that, so let's take the example of UAE and GCC. Indians and Pakistanis work together very well in companies, in business, and, has the best of relationships. But unfortunately, when it comes to geopolitical issues, it's as an ordinary citizen, as a local society, as a local business, or even as a large corporate chain, I have my restraints. I'll give you one personal example. I founded and ran an ambulance service. Pakistani fund guy, Arif Naqvi of Abraj Capital. So we were funded by Acumen Fund, and Arif was connected with Acumen Fund. So Arif wanted to do this ambulance service in Karachi, and the fund connected us. We worked together. We had the entire Aman Foundation team. Arif's team had come to Mumbai, got trained in how to run the ambulance. We shared processes, protocols, technology, etc. But unfortunately, just before we were slated to launch and work together in Karachi, the unfortunate Mumbai terror attacks happened. Now, there was nothing that we could do, nor they could do, to do anything. Okay. So, the geopolitical issues is something outside the control of businesses. That leadership has to come from the political leadership of the nation.
And Mike, if I can ask you, I mean, I guess you and Shafi are both talking a bit about the sort of, the sort of cross-country relations in South Asia. Is that something, I mean, we wish the governments would, solve something, although it's not just a government issue, it's also an issue of public opinion as well. There are some constraints, but is that something where business could take more of a lead? I mean, should we be seeing more private sector collaboration between countries in South Asia?
Well, as a global citizen, which I pride myself on being, because born in South America, speaking English and Spanish, and my wife is Chinese, Indian, and Portuguese, I can very much be at home in Beijing, Delhi, or elsewhere. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't like wars. We have enough social inequalities and problems, and the private sector does work hand in hand. In the case of the Caribbean, we are about 20 small islands, and of course Guyana and Suriname being the larger ones. We will rather put our efforts in dealing with issues of education, gender empowerment, and what have you. So I'm not coming from a society or part of the world where we had a war or exposed to conflict. So we are big advocates of dialogue, peaceful compromise, restraint, you know, a bit like the UAE. You know, we are there, but we want to be a good arbiter of peace and cross-border collaboration. I believe companies that are global in nature, it's in their interest to have a world in which they can conduct their business. Because when you have wars and you have instability, it drives capital away. So I believe at the end of the day, and I like to use the World Economic Forum as a very credible organization, and to say the pen is indeed mightier than the sword.
Okay. I'd like to move on from geopolitics, actually, but Minister, I can bring you back to the question, which is, what do we wish, what should the private sector do? So, maybe from your perspective as government, what actions are you looking to see from the private sector?
As I said, the government's job is to give policies only, and the government gives the policies which are good for the private sector to come and invest in the countries, and then the government has to give infrastructure, government has to give good power supply, gas supply, so to attract the investment into their countries. That's what the government of Pakistan is also doing. The government of Pakistan does not want to come into the business because we have had a very bad experience of running the industries in the government sector. And now we have 7, 8 industries in the government sector which are already on the privatization list. And from this forum, I'm inviting the people. We have steel mill, which is on the privatization list. We are looking for strategic partners or anyone who would like to come and lease it for long term and run it in Pakistan. So we are trying to provide infrastructure. We are trying to give tax holidays. We are trying to give duty incentives. That's what the government's job is. Now the private sector has to decide to come and invest. The things have to be normal. No, as my friend said, no one likes war. No human being, no people would like a war. But you know, you have to respect the borders also. And once there's no problem the borders, I'm sure the trade thing and everything can be worked out. That, as I said before also, the Prime Minister of Pakistan wants trade, especially with its neighbors, including India. And if the things normalize at the borders from the other side, then I think the things can move forward, and we can talk on the free trade and business in between the two countries also.
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, we're running out of time now for the end of the session, but I mean, I think what in this discussion we have shown some of the great complexity of the South Asian region, but also it has a lot of opportunity. If we look around the world now, India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. It's about number 8, the 8th fastest growing country in the world at the moment, but all the ones above it are quite small, so things like Cambodia. But outside of India, actually also all the other South Asian countries, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, even Bhutan and Nepal, all growing quite fast at the moment. So a lot of growth, but also a lot of challenges and a big to-do list both for the public sector and the private sector. Thanks for coming along. Please join me in thanking the Power Panel, Minister Khan Jatoy, Mike Singh and Shafi Mehta. Thanks very much.